Tres Leche cake is a fully moist, beautiful cake. This one is switched up for St. Patrick's Day with some Irish cream, a few variations, but still the delicious cake. Delicious flavor. I think you're gonna love it, so let's make it together. This Tres Leches cake is slightly different. It has a little bit more of a seasonal touch since we're coming up on St. Patrick's Day. It has, instead of the 3 traditional milks, it also has Irish cream or Irish liqueur cream that we're gonna put into it. It's delicious. You can of course make that optional, but that makes this a little bit more of those caramelly notes. We're also gonna change up one of the other milks too, just to really drive home that depth of flavor that you can get from the mixture being poured over the cake. If you haven't had a Tres Leches cake, you should know that it starts with a delicious cake and then it has a milk mixture poured over it and it soaks into the cake. It's extremely delicious and just kind of melts in your mouth. So it's gonna start with a good cake. So we're gonna start with room temperature butter. Now, the thing is, room temperature is gonna cream into the sugar more correctly. So that's why you wanna have it more room temperature. You don't need it warm. You don't want it to be melty. You want it to be able to actually work into the sugar. So we're gonna put our sugar right into it. And you know, the thing is, when you're creaming something, I think we often forget that the timing it takes to cream something is important. It's not just throw it in there and let it go a little bit. The reason I'm gonna use a stand mixer, you can do this by hand, but the thing is, when you do this correctly, it actually changes that sugar and butter, gets a little bit lighter in texture, and it gets fluffy, and that's really important. So it takes 3 to 5 minutes, even on a stand mixer. So that's why we wanna make sure to actually do it long enough to get it going. So I'm gonna put my paddle on there, raise it up, and start mixing. So you can see after mixing, it becomes light colored and actually it's light and fluffy in texture, and that's exactly what you need. So I always scrape down the sides of the bowl here during this because even in a stand mixer, it sometimes doesn't get to the bottom bits, but you can see here, and I wanna really drive home that doing this mixing, doing the light and fluffy thing that you always read about in a recipe but don't know, it's important. It actually aerates that butter. It actually combines those two, and it really is what helps the texture of the cake in the end. So with it running on low, I'm gonna add in my eggs one by one just so they evenly incorporate too. And I am gonna crack them into a bowl. 1, it's just as easier to add them in. 2, I'm notorious for otherwise accidentally getting some shell in the bowl as it's mixing, and it's like, why even try that? Just put them in a bowl and then one by one, let them fall in. If you get 2 in at a time, that's okay, but usually about 1 will wanna go in, and let that mix in, and then keep incorporating each one. When all the eggs are incorporated, I'm just gonna put in my vanilla. Yes, I measure with the heart with vanilla because you know what? Vanilla is delicious. I make my own at home, and it's just, I love adding vanilla. So when that's done, which takes really no time at all, I again will do a scrape just to make sure everything's incorporating, but look how beautiful the beginnings of this cake are. You can see it's gonna be a good cake. Now each step does make a difference in just giving you that correct texture, and make sure you also clean off the beater if you're using a stand mixer. I feel like I have a love-hate relationship with stand mixers. They're wonderful, they do most of the work, but you do have to do a couple checks, like make sure everything's incorporating evenly, make sure you don't overmix, things like that. So now we wanna put together our dry ingredients, and we're gonna alternately just add them with the whole milk. And the reason I always use whole milk in something like this is because guess what? Whole milk has more flavor. Fat is flavor. So I'm gonna measure my flour in, and to do that, I always just do a scoop it in and then swoop it off. So you just wanna make sure you're not over adding flour, and sometimes when you just jam your measuring cup down in the flour, you add way more than you think you do. So instead, it's always better just to overfill it and then just swoop it off. Believe me, it will make your baking just so much better. So now into that, I wanna put some baking powder. That's what's gonna help, again, give that cake some really nice rise, a really nice texture, and it just is gonna create that perfect consistency that we want. With that, of course, we need some salt. Salt is gonna balance the flavors, but also bring out flavor, and that's what you need. And then a little bit of cinnamon. Now, cinnamon might sound odd, but what's amazing here is the milks we're gonna pour over are really gonna drive home an interesting caramelly flavor, and the cinnamon really brings that together too, and just a hint of it goes a long way in here. So I'm just whisking that to incorporate, make sure my dry ingredients are evenly combined, and now we can just add them alternately with the milk, and I will end with the milk. So I'll add some of the flour, a little bit of the milk, some of the flour, a little bit of the milk, until it's all incorporated. So I'm just gonna pull this up, let it start mixing, add some of this flour mixture, and then just go on with some of the milk mixture. This just helps create that perfect texture you want in a cake. So alternating, make sure it mixes evenly and gives you a really good texture. I'm adding in the final bit of the milk, and the thing is, after you add the final ingredients, you just don't want to overmix because that can actually make for a tough cake. So you want to make sure everything is well combined. And then I will always give my final few kind of mixes with my spatula. That just makes sure I can see and feel the dough, not dough, but it's batter, and know what's going on in it. So make sure you clean off your beater well. Why? Because there's so much goodness on it. This is cake batter. You don't want to let that go to waste. I think we forget that these little things all make a difference, and I always make sure, more because my mom would somehow probably just like show up if I didn't do this and scold me on it, because she'd say, Caleb, she will even do the eggs. Make sure when I crack an egg, she will go in and make sure I got all the white out. Yeah. So once you're getting that all done, I'll do a final couple stirs just to make sure it's well incorporated and that there's no lumps. We went to all this work to make sure we had a perfect texture. You don't want to spoil that now with something not being evenly mixed. But you can see there how beautiful that batter is. So I have it prepared, 9 by 13, it's well greased. I'm gonna pour this right into it. All that batter is gonna go in here, and then it's just gonna bake. So the beauty of this cake is, you can see it's a pretty just simple base for the cake, but then once it's baked and it cools, we're going to actually poke holes in it. We're gonna make a really delicious milk mixture, and the milk mixture is gonna deviate from traditional milk mixtures, as mine so often do. I like to break rules when it comes to the kitchen. I don't like to follow the status quo or always do what all recipes are. Instead, I like to kind of make them my own, and that's what this one is. It's using what I think is gonna be really delicious for this time of year and having it on there. So I'm just gonna spread this out to an even layer. Then we're gonna pop this right into a preheated oven, let it bake, make the milk mixture, make a quick frosting, and then eat it. So the cake has baked, and you can see it gets a nice crumb and crust on it. I love that browning because that's gonna be so much flavor. And it's still warm, but I'm letting it cool just slightly. And now we wanna mix up the milk mixture that's going on top. So very normal, we're gonna add in some whole milk. No problem there. Where we start deviating is the next two. So instead of just sweetened condensed milk, I'm gonna take it one step further and use the sweetened condensed milk that actually becomes a caramel, or dulce de leche. This is a delicious kind of depth of flavor that to me you just can't really mimic. And while sweetened condensed milk is what traditionally would maybe be worked into there, it doesn't have the flavor that this does. And I really love how this works, not only with the cake itself, but then with what else we're gonna mix it with, which is, since we're coming up on St. Patrick's Day, or really it doesn't have to be for that, it can be for any time of year, some Irish cream, which is, a lot of people use it in their coffee. It's a cream and Irish whiskey type liqueur that just smells amazing. It really has those caramel flavors too. So it's gonna work together with these two so well. Now it takes a minute to whisk in that dulce de leche into this, but believe me, it's totally worth just taking a minute to make sure it whisks together until it's smooth. If you don't want to whisk, you can always do a blender, an immersion blender, but you can get it whisked in. So once it's whisked in, we just want to worry now about the cake. So I've went through and poked most of it just because it takes a little bit of time. You can use a skewer or just a fork, and I like to make sure I get it well covered. I go all the way down to the bottom of the cake, and this is just going to give more area for all this milk to start going into all those crevices and soaking into the cake. So I like to grab a wooden spoon. You don't have to, but I think when you're pouring it over, it can be a little bit easier to do it evenly if you take a spoon so it just doesn't hit the surface of the cake, and slowly let it fall over all the cake. Now it's gonna go to the edges, of course, too, but I like to make sure I get it all over the center of the cake, just to make sure I do it slowly so it soaks in as I'm pouring. Now, as I'm doing this, don't worry if it starts pooling around the edges. That's normal. It's gonna take a while for it to actually saturate. So it's a lot of milk mixture, but that's what makes this such a special cake. And it just is this beautiful texture. If you're from the Midwest, this has similarities, not completely, but similarities to a poke cake or a better than anything cake. Yeah, you know which one I mean. And it kind of has those moments, but a little bit more of that delicious liquid over the top. So now to make sure it's fully saturated and let it give it time that it needs to actually be able to accept all that milk, we're gonna put it in and let it chill completely. I want this to chill before we put any type of frosting on it, which is a really quick whipped cream frosting, and let it fully absorb all that wonderful mixture. So we're gonna let it chill then we'll finish it up and I'll try it. You can see the cake has chilled. It doesn't really look different other than that milk is now soaked into it, which is the important part. Chilling also helps it will slice easier too. It's gonna be very laden with moisture, so you want it to be chilled so it holds slightly. But it's kind of the exciting part now where we can really finish it up. So I just wanna make a quick frosting, and it's just gonna be a whipped cream based frosting because we have so much rich, delicious flavors in here. You just want something light and kind of airy and fluffy, thus whipped cream. So we're gonna put some heavy cream right into a mixing bowl. I like it to be well chilled because it usually whips up bigger and better. And then I like to always offset. So since this has so many rich flavors, there's a lot of sweetness that goes into this, I want some Greek yogurt or sour cream. One, it can stabilize that whipped cream, but it also has a tanginess and offsets and gives you this depth of flavor that to me is really important. A little bit of powdered sugar, that's gonna help balance out the flavor because heavy cream on its own doesn't have sweetness. And then a little bit of vanilla. I mean, that's no question, of course. So we're gonna put all this right on the mixer and just start whipping it up. And you know that it's best to start a little bit low just to start aerating it and then turn it up to high until it's just light, fluffy, and stiff. So you wanna put your whisk on there. You could do it by hand, but please, mixers help. When it's done, you get a nice stiff peak. Now, if you didn't know, if you take it too far and it starts looking curdled, add a little bit more of just the whipped cream, like just unwhipped, like a tablespoon or two, whip it into it, and it will actually smooth it out a little bit more. So don't feel bad if you feel like you took it too far. So what we're gonna do is just top it on the cake. And what I love about this is that small amount of Greek yogurt or sour cream, whatever you keep on hand, not only does it balance the flavor out, which I promise you it really does just taste better with it, but it actually adds this nice, I think it just adds this nice tanginess that kind of like how cream cheese would, but in a little bit more of a subtle way. And I think that's really important to do. So what we're gonna do now is just spread it over the cake. And I do have a kind of slight fun trick to make this feel a little bit seasonal. And again, you can make this technically any season. I mean, imagine this even at Christmas. The flavors of the Irish cream are gonna work well. It's nothing special, just need to spread it out. Now, if you wanna take it a step further, you can take some green gel food coloring, and every so often, just put like a drop, just one drop right on here. And I know that will seem kind of scary, but what we're gonna do is take this then and start spreading that out, and you're gonna get these beautiful green hues. Now, we don't wanna do it so thick that it just becomes green, but you wanna do it every so often just to get the idea across that we're gonna have this seasonal kind of marbling effect on it. And look how fun that is. So you can see all it does is just make this kind of quick effect of like green and not. This is ready to go. Now you can keep it in the fridge, and what's great is that little bit, like I said, of Greek yogurt actually stabilizes that whipped cream, so it'll hold a lot better than you think it will compared to just traditional whipped cream. It holds really well in the fridge. So I'm just gonna cut a nice corner piece here. And always the first piece is the hard one to get out. So really honestly, it just makes sense to have one in the kitchen first to try it all out. But then grab that out. Oh, look at that. You can see how it's starting to work down into the cake through all those holes we poked in there. Oh, this is my favorite. I just think it's such a delicious, like fully, yeah, I'm gonna use the word moist cake, and that is my favorite. Look at that beautiful crumb on it. It's delicious. It's absolutely delicious. If you don't like Irish cream, swish that out for like an evaporated milk, because that is such a delicious flavor here, but it's balanced with that dulce de leche that has those caramely notes too, and then some of the milk that actually balances and mellows that out too. What's fun about this is it's a great treat to kind of change it up seasonally if you want to, but it's also just a fun year-round cake. It can really, why not make it for a birthday? Why not make it for a gathering? It makes a nice size, but it's easy to serve. So what do I hope you do with this recipe? As with all my recipes, they're about making you feel confident in the kitchen, because if I can do it, anybody can do this. These steps create this cake, and it's delicious every time. Check my website, wiseguy.com, for this recipe and all my other recipes. They're all on there so you can replicate and enjoy.